So, I'm Filip, and I would like to talk a little bit about Android and accessibility, because I think our application should be usable by as many people as possible. So, if accessibility is for you only like nagging from time to time in your editor, I hope that you will, after this presentation, know a little bit more why you should do it and mainly how you can do it. Because, as I already said, I think if you make an application, you should try and make it usable by as many people as possible, also if you have some kind of disability or whatever. Now, just like Simon, who convinced us all to start using Conductor and Anko, I guess, I work for a company called App Foundry. And Simon and I also happen to work like part of our time for the same client, and this VRT, so I think most people here will know VRT. Public broadcaster here, and they have television stations, they do radio channels, they have brands around news and sports and youth and kids and so on. So they already have like quite a whole lot of applications, like news applications. We have like sports applications or football applications. They already announced that in a couple of months all video they have will be coming in a new app and so on. We have radio channels that you can listen to. But the thing is, VRT is like public broadcaster, as I said. So it's funded by you and mine taxes we pay. And the thing is that if you get like a grant from the government, there are, of course, I would say, a couple of gotchas. And one of those is that the government, well, basically forces you to think about accessibility. Every application you make should be usable by anybody. Should be accessible for everyone. Now, I don't really have that much experience with accessibility before I started working for VRT, but I would say, like, these days more and more clients are already starting to think about it. Like if you work for a couple of big companies, some of them already think about accessibility, and I think it will always be more and more important in the future. But for me, like, an eye-opener was when you start working for a client who really values accessibility. And like for instance at VRT we do these tests. We invite all kinds of people. People with vision impairment, blind people, but also people that have like motoric impairments, or we also invite people with like syndrome of Down and so on. We just want to make an application and apps and websites that are accessible for everyone. And so from time to time we organize these sessions, and then well, some people can't hear, so we see, well, do we do enough for the deaf and so on. And a good thing to do, what we do from time to time, is we will also videotape these sessions. So, and then we will go back to the team, and what you see here is, well, to spare myself, because our first Android application with it was quite bad accessibility-wise, so I've taken a video from my iOS friends. But basically what we do from time to time is we invite, for instance in this case, blind people, and we give them like a scenario, some tasks to do. Like in this case, for instance, it is like, okay, say me what are the highlights of yesterday's news, or show me what is the first topic that was in yesterday's news journal and so on. And then we videotape them while they are doing the action. And in this case, it already took this user 2.5 minutes to find his way through the navigation. So what we find quite normal, we take a look at an app and we immediately can go through the whole navigation. If you don't take accessibility into account, Harry, who is a blind person, it already took him 2.5 minutes. So that's really, well, it's an exercise in frustration basically for him. And this is good. Like, we can go back to the team and we then show them, well, this is how the app is working for instance, blind people. Isn't it a shame that it took them 2.5 minutes to even find the menu entry to go to yesterday's journal, for instance. So that is quite good. If you can, and if maybe your client is big enough, it's very nice if you can invite in some people with some disabilities, and it will immediately become clear what the problem is. But for the rest, I hope to convey in the coming minutes what you already should do to have like a good baseline in accessibility. Because as I already said, we shouldn't make all these assumptions. Some people really can't see, some people have like a motor impairment, they for instance can't touch the screen with precision. Some people also don't hear, so never do audio-only feedback. Some people also have a problem with speech, and so on. And just to give you a few numbers to make it like, to set the scene, for instance, even if you think about something like color blindness, 1 in 12 men is colorblind. Funnily enough, only 1 in 200 women has color blindness, but that's already quite like a big group. We estimate that more or less 2% of the population has like some kind of problem with their vision. And for Belgium, that means that like more than 200,000 people that could potentially use a app have like some kind of visual impairment. And more or less 10,000 people in Belgium are even blind or almost blind. So it's really like enough. It's like a sizable chunk of our would-be users that have like some accessibility problem. Outside of vision, there are also people that have like these motor impairments. Some people really have a hard time using their hands, for instance. And for a lot of them, it's a permanent problem. So you can have like all these diseases, you could have like spinal cord injuries, ALS, whatever. But also for a lot of people, it's just situational. It's something that will happen for a period of time in their life. You could have like a very bad accident and it would take you like a couple of months even to recover. Wouldn't it suck if you were laying in hospital and you can't even use your phone to entertain yourself? And I would even take it a little bit further. For me, for instance, if you think about accessibility, it can also be that your hands are just busy. For me, for instance, I like to cook. It's very nice for me that I have an app that I can totally control through voice, for instance. So if I have dirty hands, I can be busy in the kitchen, and still, if my cooking app has like implemented accessibility quite well, I could just talk to my tablet and follow more recipes. So for some people it's really necessary, and for other people it's just very handy if you think about accessibility. Now, Android has a whole system called the accessibility services that can help you. And there are 4 main services nowadays. I think most people will not talk back. So all your content is spoken by text-to-speech, and you will interact with the screen through gestures. Then of course a variant is Braille back. So for blind people that have like a Braille display, all the content will be read through the Braille display. Next to that you have switch access. I don't think that many people know about it, but you can interact with Android through switches. You have like, I'm going to show a couple of photos next how you could think about it, but Android itself, you can drive it through buttons and switches. And then fourth one is quite new. It's called voice access, and this is really the idea that every action you want to do on an Android device, you should be able to do it through voice. Now, a couple of pictures. This is an example of a Braille reader. So all the text will be here. You can feel the Braille, and then this is typical how they would also input it. So like even if you want to type text, it's all combinations of those different buttons. For people with a motor impairment, so if you have trouble interacting with your touch device, this is a tool you could use. So quite often it's 2 big buttons, and if you have 2 big buttons, quite often the people that use this would configure one button to have like a next functionality, and the other one would be select. So you would like go through the interface, and that's one of the things I would like to show you then. Your interface should be capable. So the people that don't have can't do fine interaction with their hands, they can just keep pushing the next button until they come at your send button, for instance, and then select it. And then last one, voice access. Again, it's quite new, but it's a voice assistant, so you can't really compare it with Google Now. I think all of us have already played a little bit with Google Now, which you can use your voice to set a reminder or send a message or opening an app. But voice access is really low-level accessibility services through your voice. So here I'm opening up Google Docs just through voice, and then the thing to see is you saw the button with which I could activate voice access. Now you can just speak into your device. It's backed by the same quite good voice recognition technologies that Google has, but also you see that most pieces on the screen get a number. So sometimes it's just easier to say a number and then you interact with that element on the screen. But it's quite capable. You can even do scrolling, you can even do clicking, and you can even do like text editing. So if I go into a document, I could even say, oh, I'm speaking, and then last word was wrong, so I can say replace this word. So it's quite capable, it's quite powerful, and the idea is that Google wants to enable every action you could do on an Android device and make it accessible through voice. Now, this is basically like the big services. Now, before I get a little bit technical and try to tell you how you could implement this all, there is one elephant in the room, and that's Android versus iOS. Elephant in the room because I think most people with a disability nowadays will have an iOS device. This is very visible in in the group of blind people and people with vision impairment. And I think, to be honest, quite part of the reason is historical. In the early days, iOS definitely was better for blind people, for instance. And so, blind people are quite well organized. You have all those organizations, and those organizations are still saying, just take an iOS device, it will work. And that's a fact. iOS is working quite well if you're blind or have like very bad vision. The thing is, nowadays, Android is becoming quite good. Google has a big team working on accessibility. But I would say, well, here, the fragmentation issue on Android is a little bit like a problem, because quite a lot of these features are bounded to the platform. So if you have like, not everybody has a Nexus device with the latest Android version. So if you have an old device with a very old Android version, you will be missing some of those features. And it's also like, well, we will still need to learn that Android is becoming quite good accessibility-wise. So nowadays, I think it's just a fact and just a given that most organizations will just say, here, just take an iOS device, we know it's working. The thing is, I think that Google is working quite hard on this problem nowadays. If we, app developers, also take this into consideration, I think in the future more and more people will see Android as a very capable platform, even if you have some kind of disability. But for us, for instance, it's quite hard, like in Belgium. We don't find that many test persons who are blind and are quite versed on Android. We are even looking in like the Netherlands to find a couple of test persons, because in Belgium, all the organizations for the blind, for instance, just say, take an iOS device, we know it's working quite well for you. So I really hope this is going to change in the future, and I think we as app developers just need to make sure that our applications are ready, and so I'm quite confident that in the future everybody will see Android as a good platform, even if you need some help accessibility-wise. Now, how could you do this? What do you need to take into consideration if you develop an Android app? Well, let's start simple. Let's start with color blindness. This is me trolling the room. Normally there should be some people here that have like little problems seeing what's going on here. But I would say, first of all, this is one of the newer features in Android. Like Android, the engineers behind Android are trying to put some kind of functionality into Android. So if you go to the settings and you are colorblind, you can already have Android change up the colors and do some on-the-fly correction. You as a developer could already go in your developer options, and you can play with these color simulations, so you can see how a colorblind person would perceive your app. That's quite interesting. It's very simple to do, and at that point, even people that are on an old device and miss those color correction options, it's quite easy for you to test and see if you, for instance, have enough color contrast. Now, there's a group called the Web Content Accessibility Group, and they think about, well, what should you do to make all the applications accessible? This is not mobile apps only, this is really also, they have lots of recommendations for websites and so on. The thing is, one of their main rules is your contrast between the foreground color, for instance, of your text and its background color should at least be 4.5 to 1. So that's something you can take into consideration. It's very easy to test for. There are a couple of apps, couple of tools that can like take a look at the screen or can take a look at screenshots that you get from your designer even before you start developing the app. So this is really like first rule to take into consideration. Make sure that there is always enough contrast. I would say this is like first rule. It's very simple. It's a very simple technical thing. I think the hard thing here is to convince your designers that they should care about contrast and that whatever fancy color scheme they come up with should maybe like be altered a little bit because it's not very accessible. And let's not even talk about when the board decides on a new color scheme as a house brand. Sometimes it's a very difficult discussion to even suggest that they should change up the colors. But if you can't, always take that into consideration. Now, other low-hanging fruit, what you all already should be doing is, Android has a couple of features like it can enlarge text, it can use these magnification gestures, it can even look into your text fields and on the fly change up the colors so that you get like more high contrast text. This is all baked into Android. I would say you as an Android developer, just make sure that you play along. So text sizes, make sure that you use SPs instead of DPs so that it can nicely grow with the settings. Make sure that your layouts are responsive. So if some text is like blown up, your layout should react accordingly and should be responsive. If you don't know, of course, everybody is able on Android to play with the text sizes. You can more or less like double it, and then you can imagine if you have like too much text or you have a button with fixed sizes, it can very well be that part of the text is like falling off. So make sure that you at least do that and that you at least test that. I would say if you have like a very text-heavy app, you might even go like, or take BBC as an inspiration. They have lots and lots of text. The app is really meant to be read. So they even have like settings in the app where you can play with font sizes, and it's quite nice because you see them change on the fly, and if you have like a little bit of a vision problem, you can nicely set the text to your liking. Now, what do you need to do as an app developer? I would say first thing is, of course, every view or every text view to begin with should be given like a good content description, because this is what is going to be read out. So in this example, for instance, if you have some text field and it's like mon, tu, whatever, be at least so kind that if a blind person is going through your interface and TalkBack is reading it back, give it a nice content description and make that, for instance, Monday instead of the abbreviation. Same for images. If you can't see, you at least feel that something is going on the screen. So also here, give it a content description. This is, of course, if the image is meaningful, if it's really part of what you want to convey. If you have just an image that is a decoration, just give it a content description now so that TalkBack knows that it can skip it. Also, quite often, it's quite strange that to give content descriptions to every individual view. Sometimes you will want to group it, like I was already telling, for instance, they have like a football application. It would be quite strange if you are a blind person and you go to it and you say like, let's show it back. If you would say Arsenal, 3-4 and Liverpool, that's not like how we talk to each other. So what you also can do is you can go like one level higher, and you could, for instance, on a whole row or on a whole card or whatever, give a content description. So that instead of like piece by piece, it would nicely say, well, Arsenal against Liverpool, it's finished with a 3-4 score, or something like that. So again, very easy, but you can also do it on the container level instead of every individual view. Sometimes it's also worthwhile to think about states. For instance, you can imagine in a football application, you could like favorite a team. So, well, I would say there are two states. You already are a fan of the team, so then the button would be like deselected as your favorite, and in the other scenario, of course, it's like, I want to mark this team as my favorite. So sometimes you will need to do it in code. You will need to think about the states and like set different content descriptions according to whatever is going on. Also, quite often, like you can imagine, you have a view, you have some stuff going on, and let's take, for instance, you have like a couple of text views. It's a small wizard. You can put in your name, you can put in your email address, and then, well, if you are typing in an email address that isn't correctly formatted, you can imagine that somewhere else in the layout, there's like a message popping up. Whoa, this is not a valid email address. Well, if you're blind, you're going to miss that, of course. So for that, there's a system called accessibility regions. So that's also something you can say. So, and that means that a live region is something that will be read when it is modified. So a typical example is like, this is an error message. Whenever you in code are putting in a message, it will be read out. Well, the thing here, polite is just the way you can configure it. Polite means is only announce something when nothing else is going on. You could also set it on assert live, and that means that interrupt whatever speech is going on, because this is like a very urgent message. Now, a variant of that is, like, if you know something is going on, for instance, like, there is some data coming in from your backhand, and you are like visualizing it on the screen, you can also just announce for accessibility. So if you know that something is happening, and you think people would not be able to see that, just announce it. And that will send out an accessibility event of the type announcement, and then whatever accessibility service they are using, it might be TalkBack, it might be their Braille display, whatever, will pick that up and will nicely announce it for the user. And that can, well, this is just another variant. Sometimes you will even need to do it in code, of course, and not in the XML. Again, if you have different states going on, it might be necessary that you tweak a little bit what you are saying, and then you announce it. Then another one, especially important for people that have like a motoric impairment, is that you control the order in which everything is focused. Because if you're using this next button to go through the screen, well, it might be like suboptimal if you would hit like every view. So you might make it a little bit more interesting, or even a little bit more logical. So that you would do just, for instance, with the next focus forward. If you would take a look at the documentation, you can quite nicely control the flow of focus. Again, this is something that is quite easy to test. I would say you all have the emulator, the Android emulator. The Android emulator comes with a D-pad, so the directional pad. So even if you don't have those fancy buttons, you don't really need it. You can just test it with the emulator and use the directional pad and see how everything is working. You can even also use gesture navigation, which is available since Android 4.1. And I hope most of you have at least Android 4.1 as a minimum SDK. So these are both things that you can quite easily test. You definitely don't need expensive hardware that only like people with some kind of impairment would have. So this is basically like an overview, what you would do, how you can influence your layouts, and how you can make them more accessible. Now another thing we do is, well, sometimes we think about, well, how will this be perceived by people with disabilities? And sometimes we will even change up the UI a little bit. I have a very simple example. Our normal users have the luck to see advertisements. Don't get me started on that, but anyway, they have them. But that would make totally no sense for instance, blind people. So we just filter them out. And that's something you can, of course, well, convey to your business. I mean, there would be no use for the actual. This is just HTML is loaded in. It has no accessibility information whatsoever. So for a blind person, if you're navigating to the screen, it's just like one black hole. So we just filter it out. And that's also how we think about sometimes you will need to go as far as tweak a little bit your UIs, so just for accessibility purposes. Now, how can you detect it? It's quite easy. There's an accessibility manager that you can just query. So it's a system service. You can get a hold of it. And then, for instance, yeah, you start with, is it enabled? And then we go a little bit further because there can be several accessibility services enabled at the same time. For instance, I use Nova Launcher as my launcher, and they even have like an accessibility service running. That's of course to work around some Samsung bugs, what else? But I also, for instance, have like Twilight, which in the evening is filtering out the blue light and so on. So you should go a little bit further than only checking is accessibility services enabled. We also check if touch exploration is enabled. That's already an indication. And then we even go one further. You can also like inquire the accessibility manager to know a little bit more. For instance, you can query the accessibility manager and ask it, well, what is going on? What kind of services are in use for the moment? Is it like spoken feedback? Is it braille display feedback? Is it haptic feedback? So you can like form quite a nice opinion about what is going on and then decide in your UI, should I react accordingly? But again, it's still quite simple to inquire the accessibility manager to see what is going on. And so this is how we know that we will need to tweak the layout a little bit. Now, as said, you put on a content description. I think it's logical that you need to think quite well about what is a meaningful text to give back to the accessibility system. Now, don't look too much at the code. What I just want to say is, quite often you will have quite a lot of codes and you will be playing around with strings and joining them and whatever, and you even might have Guava, which is helping a little bit with string handling. The message I want to convey is sometimes it will be juggling around with strings because, like, in most languages you already have like separation between one item and multiple items, so that's already like two strings. You already will be using the plural strings in the Android resources, but still it will need quite a lot of tweaking. So what we quite often do is we have, well, we enlist some help from our backend. So if you would take a look at the backends we use, and then you would see that whatever data we get back, quite often we will also tag it with accessibility texts. First off, that makes it a little bit easier for us, the client developer. You don't have to do all that string juggling yourself. And of course, a second good reason to do this is we can quite easily share it with our iOS friends, with our web friends. So even if you have like an iOS, an Android, and a web app front end on the same backend, the logic only needs to be written once. And it's quite easy also that it's on the backend, so if you need to change it up, it's just a deploy away and not like a 2-week waiting for Apple review, for instance. So this is something that is working quite well for us. As much as possible, we enlist the help from our backend instead of doing all this. What should the accessibility text be in this case ourselves? Now, this is basically already the end of like what should you do for accessibility, and I would say, although I say it myself, I don't think it's quite hard. I think this is quite easily like the lowest or the easiest tech-wise talk of the day. And if you do all these things, it's already like you've really done your best. You've really done an effort to make your app accessible. Now, sometimes you will need to go a little bit further, and I want to show you one thing more, and that's, for instance, if you want to think about custom views. So, custom view can be anything. I wanted to take a look at an example, something that is, well, that we could use. But The thing is, I first want to show you how Google Plus is working. Google Plus, why? Well, because the Google Plus team is thinking quite hard about accessibility, and they've really done a good effort to make the app really accessible. And so you can imagine that if we are just going through our stream and we take a look at posts and so on, you always have lots and lots of actions on posts. And that can be very, very small targets for everybody to hit. So they went one step further, and Android also has a system where you can have custom actions. So let's go one further. And I'll just make it a little bit more concrete. So instead of having all those little views, all those little buttons and so on, you can just make a separate view for people that have accessibility going on. And we just saw how you can detect that. And then you can just say, well, this layout, I can label all my buttons, but it's just like way too difficult to find your way around if you don't see the screen. So you can just integrate with the custom actions, and then it will pop up a nice dialog which is really integrated in TalkBack and so on, and that will be like sometimes a lot easier for the user to use. So the example I wanted to do is, let's imagine that in the football application, everybody is doing social now, so let's say VRT wants to have like a social football app. What could it do? You can imagine that like you see all the matches from the teams that you have favorited, and then you could imagine that, well, if you click on it, you go to like the whole detail of the match, but you can also imagine that you want to share it, or you want to comment on it, or you want to like the result if your favorite team did win. So again, I'm not going to show a lot of code. Let's just imagine that this could have an interface with those 4 actions. You want to know when you click on something, when you want to comment on something, when you want to like, and when you want to share it. So this is how it would look normally. So you can imagine you have accessibility services on, you have TalkBack on, and you could say, well, still, you could label everything, but I mean, it's not a far stretch that if you are blind and maybe you are just navigating from the top to the bottom, you would miss those other buttons. So, thinking, I might make this better. So, how would you do that? First off, instead of labeling all the separate views, I want to treat it as one block, and I want to say, for this block, I am going to provide whatever is necessary for accessibility. So the way you do that is, you just say, it's going to work, important for accessibility, no height descendants. So this means, for this container, I am responsible for accessibility. Quite easy, you just set it on the container. And after that, you could imagine, well, I'm going to do it myself, well, I'm going to show up a dialogue and whatever. But a good way is different. The good way is that you integrate with something that is called the accessibility delegate. So you get a delegate that will be the bridge between your application and whatever accessibility subsystem there is. And so it's quite easy. Basically, the only 2 important words in the slide is you will extend the accessibility delegate, or you might prefer accessibility delegate compat, of course, and then you can add your own actions. The rest is just boilerplate to have everything set up. And then, for instance, when something happens in a view, you are nicely integrated in the accessibility subsystem. So you do this, you just say, for my view, I will set this, whatever delegate you have just written, as the accessibility delegate for the view, and you're integrated. And so what you get at that point is, you just have made all these actions, and so when somebody is working or interacting with this view, the accessibility system takes over, but you have nicely given it all information it needs to provide all those options. And it's a little bit depending on the device you're running in, and whatever the people with disability want, because they can well, configure it how they want. We already saw an example of Google Plus on one of my phones. It had a nice dialogue, but it's also possible, I'm going to show it again, it's also possible for some people, it's just easier if they have like a nice circular dialogue. It works good for them. So this is how it could work. The 4 navigation options I have instead of fiddling, instead of finding the right view, I have integrated with the accessibility subsystem. I have given it the 4 options, and at that point, it's a familiar, I was going to say UI, it's not something visible, but it's a familiar system for somebody who has some disabilities. So, even for custom views, or even for views that are really full of interaction, it's quite easy still to make a good experience for people with disabilities. And there's a nice system with the accessibility delegates so that you can have a bridge between your code and whatever Android is doing behind the screens. And I would say this is basically it. This is like all the main topics for accessibility. I would still claim that it's quite easy. It's not really hard. It's really not taking that much time. It's not something that you should consider like a separate feature or separate story. I think you can all agree that this still looks like something you could just take with you, you know about it, and you just consider it as part of development of a feature. And that's basically what we need to do at VRT. When we want to say our feature is done, it means that we also have implemented accessibility. And most of the time, it will not take that much time. Even for the custom view, we saw that it's quite straightforward and not that much code. Now, just taking it one step further, we also like writing some tests, or we want to check that our application is accessible. So a little bit more about testing. How do you know if your app is working well, accessibility-wise? Of course, you could start with do some manual testing. I imagine you all have like closets full of devices, and you could just take a look yourself. This is something that is still quite good to do. So I would encourage all of you to learn like the real basics of accessibility. If you would go to the settings of your Android device, you will accessibility is one of the main sections, and in there you would all find TalkBack. And if you enable it, you even get like a nice tutorial. So I would encourage all of you to at least take a look at the TalkBack basics. It's something that you can grasp in like half an hour. It has a nice tutorial that you can follow, and by the end of it you will have a feel for whatever people with some kind of disability will need to use when you want to interact with your application. And yeah, you will need to learn a few gestures or whatever. You will need to know how can I work with Touch by Explore, because it means that like if you want to go back, that means down left. If you want to go home, that's up left. If you want to see the local context menu that I used for my custom view and the actions I did put in it, it's up right. So it will take a little bit of time or a little cheat sheet, but it's quite easy to work with. And as I said, in a couple of minutes, you have really seen the basics, and you could do a little bit of testing. Well, how does my app feel for people that need accessibility? But Google is really all in on accessibility, so they are really not only working on Android, on the system itself, they are also working on something which is called the Accessibility Scanner. So it's an application coupled with an accessibility service that is really a tool that you can use to inspect your applications. So it's a tool you can download from the Play Store. First run, it will ask, can I be registered as an accessibility service? So you will turn it on, and then you can use it on your own application. So what you will see at that point is it's a little button that is hovering on top of your screen, and the moment you touch it, it will try to do an analysis on whatever is visible on the screen. This is basically what is happening. I could use an application. It will try to take a screenshot, and it will walk the hierarchy of the application. Now, this is what you want, of course. No problems with this view, no problems with our application. So just to show it, I've taken Google Play Movies, and so I've done the same. I've run it through the accessibility scanner, and at that point you see that the tool found like 3 problems with the screen. It's nice, it gives you like the screenshot with annotations, so you see where it is, and it also gives like nice textual descriptions with whatever it thinks is the problem. Now, to be honest, I would say this tool is really like the quick sanity checks. It will not find every problem that could be accessibility-wise. But it's doing all the basics, so it's really, I think, quite a useful tool. It will go through all the basic accessibility features, and it will try to find out whatever view you made, is it working well. So again, I would encourage you, it's quite easy, just an app you install, and you can have it go through all the screens of your application, and it will immediately give feedback. It will even try to link to documentation to say, well, did you even think about touch, target size, and so on. Also, you as a developer, you all are working in Android Studio, you are, I think all, or most of you are working with Gradle, so it's very easy to have like lint doing checks on your code. And we are developers, so I would say the more we can automate, the better. So I would encourage you to go like in the settings of lint, and by default, missing content descriptions is only a warning. Just make it an error so that your build can be flagged, and set up your lint so that when you are forgetting to set some content descriptions, that it just fills your build. Quite easy, and that's already like the most important one that you should never forget when you make an application. But then, of course, lint can flag like these missing content descriptions, but it can't say if the content description is like a good, meaningful text. So I would say, well, let's write some tests. Let's first of all check yourself with, for instance, Espresso. If you use Espresso as a UI testing tool, it's quite easy. So you could quite easily say, I'm going to write a scenario, I'm going to spin up my UI, I'm going to do like a whole flow through it, and at certain points I will check if everything is working well. So for the radio app, you could imagine play, stop, all those states should be working well. And the last thing I want to show you is, we saw the accessibility scanner. It's doing like all those, it's doing all this logic, introspecting the screen, seeing if everything is working well. Well, they are also working on like getting an Espresso interface to the same kind of tests. So in the Espresso contrib package, you have now like accessibility unit testing tools. And so quite easy. You can just enable the accessibility checks, and at that point you can have like whatever that the accessibility scanner could do for you, you can have it as part of your test runs. So here is a small example. I've written very simply out. I've introduced some errors I knew, and then you can have just like an Espresso test, and just by enabling those basic accessibility checks, it's already flagging the problems. And in this case, quite easy. It says, well, one of your views is missing like a good text that I could give to talk back. And also, for instance, one of my touch targets is view falls below the minimum recommended size for touch targets. The target size should be at least 48 by 48 dp. So that's already quite handy. We are all writing tests anyway, aren't we? So just enable this accessibility checks in your Espresso tests, and you have a little bit, well, whatever that editor can do for you automatically is already done during your tests. And this is basically it. I would say accessibility has also quite good documentation. So that's also no reason not to do it. You have the developer.android site. It's a very good starting point if you want to know a little bit more about accessibility. And so I think, and I hope that with whatever we saw today, that you can all agree with me that caring about accessibility is not that hard development-wise. It will not take you that much extra time. It's not something that you need to budget for and need to, well, take another week before you will be able to release. If you do it like from the first time on, it's really something that will be part of your development flow. It will not be, again, whatever we saw is basically all there is to tell about accessibility, and that was quite easy, I would suppose. So I hope that next time you are thinking about a new application or you want to think about a new feature, that you will take accessibility into account. And I would say lots and lots of people will be immensely grateful and thankful for you if you do that. Now, if you want to help me making accessible applications, the company I work for is looking for more people to write content descriptions and so on. And with that, that's basically my talk about accessibility. If you have any question, feel free.
Thank you.